The Tonight Show stage was buzzing with the usual late-night electricity. The laughter from Jimmy Fallon's audience had barely settled when the conversation took a turn no one saw coming. Sitting casually in the guest chair, with that familiar mix of dry wit and Hollywood nonchalance, Judd Apatow leaned forward, glanced briefly toward the crowd, and dropped a line that seemed to freeze the air in the studio. It wasn't a punchline. It wasn't a joke to be brushed off. It was a revelation. And in those seconds, you could feel a ripple of shock move through the room. Fallon's eyebrows lifted ever so slightly. The band behind him seemed to miss a beat, and the audience's laughter faltered into scattered murmurs. Judd had just suggested that Meghan Markle once made him an offer, an intimate offer, in exchange for a role in one of his movies. The moment didn't come out of nowhere. The lead-up had been deceptively lighthearted. Jimmy had been steering the conversation toward Hollywood gossip, casting decisions, and the lengths some actors might go to secure a part. This is standard fare for late-night banter, safe enough to tease, broad enough to avoid real names. But Judd, never one to completely sanitize his truth when he has something to say, decided to plant a specific name into that fertile ground. Meghan Markle. The mention alone was enough to shift the energy in the studio, given her complicated relationship with public perception. But then he went further, implying a personal encounter that blurred professional boundaries. It was the kind of statement you couldn't unhear, the kind of claim that wasn't just a Hollywood anecdote. It was an accusation that could carry consequences. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. To understand the weight of that moment, you have to consider who was speaking and who he was speaking about. Judd Apatow isn't a tabloid chaser. He's not a fringe figure trying to claw his way into relevancy. For decades, his name has been attached to some of the most commercially successful and culturally resonant comedies in film and television. Actors line up for the chance to work with him, knowing that his productions often propel careers to new heights. His reputation isn't spotless. No one's is in Hollywood, but it is firmly rooted in credibility, creativity, and influence. So when he tells a story, especially one involving an alleged personal encounter, the world listens. And when the story is about Meghan Markle, a woman whose life has already been dissected from every conceivable angle, it becomes a cultural flashpoint. Meghan's rise from supporting actress to global figure has always been a subject of fascination and debate. Before the royal titles and the high-profile interviews, there was the actress hustling in Hollywood, navigating auditions, and chasing roles that could break her out of television's supporting cast cycle. She wasn't just another face in the crowd. Those who knew her describe her as strategic, ambitious, and acutely aware of the optics around her career. That's not a criticism. It's a description of someone playing the long game in an industry where opportunities are scarce and competition is ruthless. But Judd's statement implied something more transactional, something that, if true, pulls her ambition into the murky realm of casting couch politics. This is not just about one man's late-night revelation. It's about a collision of reputations, timing, and the public's appetite for scandal. Meghan's defenders would argue that she's been relentlessly targeted by the media and that this is yet another attempt to discredit her. Her critics would seize on it as confirmation of long-held suspicions about her career tactics. Either way, the court of public opinion thrives on moments like this, where ambiguity fuels speculation and the absence of immediate evidence creates a vacuum that's quickly filled by conjecture. The visual of that Tonight Show moment is worth lingering on because it's the kind of detail that cements itself in memory. Judd didn't lean back smugly after saying it. He didn't laugh nervously to defuse the tension. He let it hang in the air, the kind of silence that's heavy but deliberate, as if daring someone to call him out or demand clarification. Fallon, for his part, did what hosts are trained to do. He shifted gears, cracked a half-joke, and tried to steer the conversation back towards safer waters. But by then, the damage, or the drama, was already done. Clips of the exchange would be circulating online before the show even finished airing. The reason this moment hits differently is because it touches on a deeper cultural conversation that's been simmering for years. Hollywood has long had whispers, sometimes shouts, about people trading intimacy for opportunity. The hashtag #MeToo movement ripped the veil off many of those stories, forcing a reckoning that led to the downfall of powerful figures. But the idea that these exchanges happen quietly, without the kind of coercion that makes headlines, still lingers in the public imagination. What Judd was suggesting wasn't necessarily criminal. It was, at least in his telling, a proposition, but it was loaded with implications about power, choice, and ambition. And then there's the question of timing. Why now? Why tell this story in this way, on this platform? Judd Apatow is a master of controlling narratives in his films, but this wasn't a movie. This was live television, where words can't be edited out before the audience hears them. Was it a calculated move, knowing it would generate media coverage? Was it an offhand remark that slipped past his internal filter? Or was it something else entirely, an intentional signal to someone, or about someone, that the past wasn't as forgotten as they might like to think? The public's relationship with Meghan Markle has always been complicated, a tug-of-war between admiration and skepticism. To some, she's a woman who defied tradition, spoke her truth, and took control of her life against enormous institutional pressure. To others, she's an opportunist whose career and relationships have been defined by strategic self-promotion. This latest claim from Apatow doesn't exist in a vacuum. It gets filtered through every headline, interview, and rumor that has preceded it. And because Meghan is no longer just an actress, but a former royal and global public figure, every personal story about her becomes part of a larger narrative about class, celebrity, and influence. As the clips spread online, the reactions fractured into predictable camps. One side condemned Judd for what they saw as an unnecessary and damaging disclosure. The other side lauded him for speaking out, even in a setting not typically associated with revelations of this nature. And in the middle were those who simply wanted to know more. What movie was being discussed? When did this happen? And what exactly was said in that private exchange? The lack of detail only deepened the intrigue, leaving everyone to fill in the blanks with their own interpretations. But The Tonight Show wasn't just a setting for entertainment that night. It became a stage for a story that would ripple far beyond its walls. The audience in the studio got the immediate thrill of being there for the reveal. The television viewers got the slightly delayed rush of seeing it play out in real time. And the internet got its latest scandal to dissect, meme, and debate into oblivion. What happens next will depend on who chooses to respond, and how. The heart of this story isn't simply whether Meghan made such an offer to Judd Apatow. It's about what happens when personal accounts intersect with public personas, when private propositions, alleged or otherwise, get dragged into the light of collective scrutiny. It's about how much we believe the people telling the stories, how much we project onto the people they're about, and how much we're willing to let our curiosity shape our sense of truth. That night on The Tonight Show, Judd Apatow didn't just tell a story. He opened a door, just wide enough for the world to peer inside, and then left it up to us to decide what we thought we saw. Whether you believe his account, question his motives, or doubt the entire premise, one thing is certain. The conversation has only just begun. And as with all stories of power, ambition, and desire in Hollywood, the truth may be far more complicated and far more revealing than anyone is ready to admit. Judd Apatow's career in Hollywood has been built on a foundation of influence, longevity, and a deep understanding of what audiences connect with. He is not just a director or a producer. He is a storyteller whose work has defined an era of modern comedy. Films like Knocked Up, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, and Trainwreck are not just box office successes, they are cultural touchstones. Actors who have worked with him often credit his projects for being career milestones, and studios trust his instincts because he consistently delivers both laughs and heart. In the entertainment industry, that kind of track record earns more than just respect, it grants power. And power, in Hollywood, means you can make or break careers with a single casting decision. Understanding Judd's standing in the industry is essential to comprehending why his statement on The Tonight Show carried such gravity. This is a man who is frequently pitched by agents, courted by actors, and whose name in the credits is often enough to get a project greenlit. An offer to appear in one of his films is not just another gig. It's a potential turning point. For an actor looking to move from supporting roles to household name status, being in a Judd Apatow movie is an opportunity that could change everything. And for Meghan Markle, in the years before her royal transformation, that opportunity could have been a golden ticket. Judd's professional journey began in the stand-up comedy circuit, where he quickly realized his gift was not just in delivering jokes, but in crafting stories that resonated. He moved behind the scenes, creating, writing, and producing projects that blended humor with humanity. By the early 2000s, his name had become synonymous with a certain brand of comedy, raunchy yet heartfelt, irreverent yet sincere. This signature style attracted a loyal following of actors eager to work under his direction. Stars like Seth Rogen, Jonah Hill, and Paul Rudd flourished in his orbit, their careers boosted by his eye for talent and his ability to write roles that played to their strengths. This background matters because it frames the alleged interaction with Meghan not as a random, throwaway story, but as an event with potentially high stakes for her career. Judd was, and still is, a gatekeeper of sorts. In an industry where access to decision-makers can determine who thrives and who fades into obscurity, proximity to someone like him is coveted. Meghan, in her pre-royal days, was still on the fringes of Hollywood recognition. She had landed her recurring role on Suits, but Suits was not a Hollywood blockbuster machine. It was a respectable cable drama with a loyal audience, yet it didn't carry the cultural cachet of network hits or feature films. Transitioning from that to a major studio comedy would have been a significant leap. Those who have tracked Meghan's career trajectory note that she was always meticulous about her networking. She attended the right events, cultivated relationships with industry insiders, and positioned herself in circles where opportunity was most likely to arise. It wasn't unusual for her to reach out to producers, directors, and casting agents with charm and professionalism. But Judd's implication on The Tonight Show suggested that this particular encounter was different, that it veered away from standard professional courtesies into something far more personal. To grasp why such a suggestion could ignite controversy, it's worth noting the context of Hollywood at that time. The industry was still reckoning with the fallout from the #MeToo movement, and conversations about the abuse of power in casting were front and center. Even consensual propositions were being re-examined under the lens of power dynamics, because when one party holds the key to career advancement, the notion of consent becomes murky. Judd's revelation, therefore, didn't just touch on gossip. It tapped into a much larger discussion about the ethical boundaries of professional relationships in entertainment. His credibility amplifies the weight of his words. Over the years, Judd has been vocal about social issues, often using his platform to speak out against injustice and misconduct in the industry. He is not known for casually slinging salacious rumors. If anything, he tends to be cautious in how he addresses personal matters. So, when he made the claim involving Meghan, it was difficult for viewers to dismiss it as a throwaway joke. There was no wink to the camera, no comedic punchline to soften the statement. It came across as a straightforward account, albeit one delivered in a conversational setting. At the same time, Judd's own position in the industry complicates the narrative. He operates in a space where he, too, holds significant power, and that inevitably raises questions about motive. Was he sharing the story to make a point about Hollywood culture? Was it an offhand comment that slipped out without considering the repercussions? Or was it a deliberate decision, perhaps prompted by something we don't yet know? These questions are the ones that keep such stories alive in the public consciousness long after the initial reveal. Meghan's defenders might argue that any encounter she had with Judd would be subject to interpretation, especially if the meeting was private and undocumented. Her critics, however, would likely point to her history of aligning herself with influential figures as part of a calculated strategy to advance her career. Whether fair or not, Meghan's public image has long been filtered through a lens of ambition, and Judd's claim feeds directly into that narrative. The intersection of their reputations is what makes this chapter so compelling. On one side, you have Judd Apatow, the respected, influential filmmaker whose films have launched careers. On the other, Meghan Markle, a woman who navigated Hollywood with determination and later became one of the most polarizing public figures in the world. The suggestion that their paths crossed under these circumstances isn't just a personal anecdote. It's a collision of two carefully constructed public images, each with its own supporters and detractors. And then there is the matter of the role itself. Judd didn't specify which film Meghan allegedly sought to be in, but speculation runs rampant. Fans and critics alike have combed through his filmography, looking for projects that align with the timeline of Meghan's Hollywood years. Was it a starring role or a supporting one? Was it a script that went on to be a major hit, or a project that never got off the ground? The absence of specifics only fuels curiosity, allowing the story to grow in the retelling. In the end, Judd's reputation provides the frame for this story's significance. His long-standing influence in Hollywood means his words carry more than just entertainment value. They shape perceptions. When someone with his standing makes a claim, it reverberates through the industry and the public in a way that few others could achieve. Whether his intention was to start a serious conversation, share a personal grievance, or simply recount a strange moment from his career, the fact remains that he set a narrative in motion. And once a story like this enters the public domain, it takes on a life of its own, shaped by speculation, reaction, and the cultural moment in which it lands. The Tonight Show has long been a stage where celebrity charm, quick humor, and just enough personal revelation blend together to create viral television moments. It's a space where actors promote their latest projects, musicians share behind-the-scenes stories, and public figures get a chance to show a lighter, more relatable side of themselves. Jimmy Fallon, with his easy laugh and rapid-fire conversational style, has mastered the art of drawing anecdotes out of his guests without making it feel like an interrogation. That night, however, the usual rhythm took an unexpected turn. The audience arrived expecting lighthearted banter, maybe a comedic sketch or two, and some harmless Hollywood gossip. What they got instead was a confession that would set social media ablaze. The segment began in familiar territory. Fallon leaned into his desk, smiling as he tossed out a question about unusual encounters in the entertainment business. He phrased it broadly, the way talk show hosts do when they want a celebrity to share a funny or quirky story. The camera occasionally cut to the audience, showing faces eager to hear some behind-the-scenes tidbit. Judd Apatow, in his characteristic understated style, responded with a few warm-up remarks, self-deprecating humor about awkward meetings and overly enthusiastic fans. The room was relaxed, laughter flowing easily. Nothing about the moment suggested it was about to become headline news. Then Fallon, always looking to steer the conversation towards something that might trend online, asked about the lengths some actors go to in order to land roles. It was an innocent enough question on the surface, one that could easily be answered with a humorous anecdote about an odd audition or a persistent agent. But Judd didn't choose a safe example. He leaned forward slightly, his tone flattening into something more serious, and uttered Meghan Markle's name. In that instant, the energy in the room shifted. It wasn't just that he had named someone whose life was already a lightning rod for public opinion. It was the weight of what he implied next. The studio audience reacted instinctively, a collective murmur replacing the laughter that had been there moments earlier. Fallon's expression froze for a split second, just long enough for viewers to notice, before he forced a chuckle, the kind that tries to downplay tension but doesn't quite land. The camera lingered on Judd, who didn't break eye contact with Fallon, letting his statement hang in the air. It was the kind of silence that television producers hate because it feels unpredictable, but for viewers at home, it was gripping. Fallon's instincts as a host kicked in. He tried to lighten the mood, tossing in a half-joking comment about how Hollywood is full of interesting negotiation tactics. But Judd's delivery hadn't been framed as a punchline, and the lack of a follow-up joke made it clear that he wasn't speaking hypothetically. This wasn't a vague reference to the entertainment industry's casting couch rumors. It was a direct, personal account involving one of the most talked-about women in the world. As soon as the segment aired, those few minutes began to take on a life of their own. Clips were pulled from the broadcast and shared across platforms before the credits rolled. Some viewers were convinced Judd had been half-joking, exaggerating for dramatic effect, while others saw no trace of humor in his demeanor. The debate began immediately. Was this a casual anecdote, a thinly veiled accusation, or a deliberately timed disclosure meant to serve a larger purpose? The ambiguity only fueled interest, and within hours, hashtags pairing Judd's name with Meghan's were trending. The set design of The Tonight Show, with its warm lighting, skyline backdrop, and familiar desk and chair arrangement, inadvertently amplified the impact of the moment. The visual comfort of the environment contrasted sharply with the tension in the air, making the reveal feel even more jarring. Audiences are used to late-night television delivering safe stories that can be neatly packaged into shareable clips. What they're not used to is a guest introducing a potentially damaging personal claim that has real-world implications for someone's reputation. In the days that followed, entertainment blogs and news outlets dissected the segment frame by frame, analyzing Judd's tone, Fallon's reaction, and even the audience's body language. Viewers who had been in the studio that night described a noticeable shift in the atmosphere, a kind of hushed anticipation about whether Fallon would press for more details. He didn't, perhaps out of respect for the potential legal and ethical pitfalls, or perhaps because he sensed that the story would snowball without him needing to fan the flames further. The Tonight Show environment itself is worth noting because it represents a unique blend of informality and influence. It's not a hard-hitting news interview where statements are expected to be scrutinized on the spot. Guests often feel comfortable enough to let their guard down, which can lead to moments of unexpected candor. But the reach of the show, millions of viewers, both on television and online, means that any statement made there instantly becomes part of the public record. Judd's decision to drop Meghan's name in that setting, knowing the platform's reach, was either a deliberate strategic choice or a moment of unfiltered truth. Either way, it was not something that could be taken back once said. From a production standpoint, the decision to air the segment unedited is telling. Networks have the ability to cut or trim segments before broadcast, especially when potentially controversial claims are made. The fact that this moment remained intact suggests that producers recognized its news value, or at least its potential to spark conversation. Whether that decision was motivated by ratings, editorial integrity, or the belief that Judd's statement didn't cross any actionable legal lines is a question that remains unanswered. Fallon himself has stayed quiet about the incident, offering no public comment to clarify his reaction. This silence only adds to the intrigue. Was he blindsided on live television, or had there been some hint before the taping that Judd might drop a story like this? Talk show hosts are usually briefed on the general topics guests plan to discuss, but surprises do happen. If this was one, it was among the more significant in recent late-night history. The Tonight Show is built on moments that make audiences feel like insiders, privy to stories and personalities they wouldn't see elsewhere. But this moment blurred the line between entertainment and revelation, between playful banter and potentially career-altering statements. For Meghan, it meant another headline tying her to a narrative she may not have anticipated. For Judd, it became a defining moment in his public persona, not because it related to his work, but because it showed a willingness to speak a controversial truth, or at least his version of it, in a forum where most people stick to safe anecdotes. In a world where late-night interviews are often forgotten by the next day, this one has proven to have staying power. It's not because of a witty exchange or a viral sketch. It's because a respected filmmaker used a platform known for levity to deliver a story with sharp edges. That contrast is what made it unforgettable, and why the clip continues to be replayed, discussed, and debated long after the taping ended. The recounting of the alleged proposition was where the air in the room truly became heavy, and it's here that Judd Apatow's choice of words and delivery cemented the moment in viewers' minds. It wasn't a sprawling, detailed confession that laid out every piece of the timeline. Rather, it was the way he crafted a brief but charged statement that left the audience grasping for the missing pieces. After Fallon had floated his question about the extreme lengths people go for roles, Judd paused in a way that suggested he was weighing whether to share what he was about to say. That pause, in live television, is almost as revealing as the words themselves. It's the kind of silence that tells the audience they're about to get something unscripted. When he finally spoke, he framed it like a memory he had held on to for some time, almost as if he'd been waiting for a moment when dropping it would have maximum impact. The sentence was simple, a reference to Meghan Markle allegedly offering something personal in exchange for a role in one of his films. There was no comedic lilt, no irony, no wink to signal that this was a joke. It was delivered plainly, like someone recalling an event without embellishment. And that simplicity made it all the more potent, because it left no doubt about what he was implying. The audience's reaction was instantaneous, some nervous laughter, a few audible gasps, and then the hush of people processing what they had just heard. The absence of detail is what made the statement so combustible. Judd didn't name the project. He didn't provide a date. He didn't elaborate on where they were or how the conversation came about. That lack of specificity gave the claim a kind of open-ended power, allowing it to take root in speculation. People watching could project their own ideas of how it might have unfolded, fitting it into whatever image they already had of Meghan's career and personality. In the age of social media, ambiguity is an accelerant. Without concrete facts to anchor the narrative, it spreads faster because everyone fills in the blanks in ways that suit their own perspective. For those who were in the studio, the body language of both men told as much of a story as the words. Judd leaned slightly forward, elbows on the armrests, voice steady. Fallon shifted in his seat, his hand moving toward his desk in a subtle grounding gesture, the kind people make when they're trying to maintain control of a conversation. The camera work even seemed to sense the weight of the moment, cutting briefly to the audience for reaction shots before returning to a close-up of Judd. In that close-up, there was no trace of a grin, just an even gaze and the calm cadence of someone stating something they were confident about. From there, Fallon did what hosts do when an interview veers into dangerous territory. He tried to pivot. He dropped a quick comment about how Hollywood stories are always wild, but Judd didn't immediately follow his lead. He let the silence stretch again, long enough to ensure that what he'd said couldn't be brushed away as a passing remark. It was a conversational anchor, pulling the rest of the interview toward it no matter what Fallon tried to do next. Even as the topic shifted, there was a visible tension in the room, a shared awareness that something significant had just been put into the public record. The way Judd recounted it also hinted at a familiarity with the dynamics he was describing. This wasn't the tone of someone sharing a one-off oddity. It was the tone of someone who had been approached in similar ways before, who understood the subtext of such conversations without it needing to be spelled out. That made the allegation even more loaded. If, in his view, Meghan's approach fit into a pattern he'd seen from others, it suggested that this was part of a larger Hollywood undercurrent, not an isolated incident. Viewers at home began parsing his phrasing for clues. Did his use of the past tense mean it happened long before Meghan's royal life? Did the lack of elaboration mean he was protecting himself legally while still getting the story out? Or was he intentionally leaving it vague to provoke interest without committing to a detailed account? These are the questions that turned a single sentence into days of headlines, think pieces, and panel discussions on entertainment news shows. The impact of that recounting was also shaped by Meghan's public narrative. Over the years, she has been portrayed as both a victim of unfair treatment and as someone who skillfully navigated relationships to her advantage. Inserting this new allegation into that narrative created a fault line. Her supporters dismissed it as baseless gossip from an old Hollywood acquaintance, while her critics latched onto it as proof of long-standing suspicions about her methods for advancing her career. That polarization ensured the story's staying power. It wasn't just about what was said, but about how it confirmed or contradicted pre-existing beliefs. Judd's decision not to provide more detail also left an opening for others to step in. Former industry colleagues, anonymous sources, and self-proclaimed insiders began offering their own takes, some claiming to know which film she was aiming for, others insisting they'd heard similar whispers years ago. The lack of concrete evidence didn't slow the conversation, it intensified it. In the world of public perception, the mere suggestion of impropriety can sometimes matter as much as proof. The retelling of the alleged proposition on national television was a masterclass in how a few well-chosen words, delivered in the right setting, can ignite a media firestorm. It was not the length of the story but the precision of the delivery that made it unforgettable. By naming Meghan Markle, by framing the encounter as a proposition, and by refusing to dilute the moment with humor or deflection, Judd ensured that the clip would be dissected and debated long after the cameras stopped rolling. And for Meghan, whether the claim is true or not, the fact that it was said at all on such a prominent stage means it now lives in the public consciousness, an allegation that will be revisited every time her Hollywood years come under scrutiny. Before Meghan Markle became one of the most polarizing public figures in the world, before the royal titles, the Oprah interview, and the global debates about her place in the monarchy, she was another actress in Hollywood fighting for her break. Her career in the years before Suits was a mix of small television roles, background appearances, and the kind of guest spots that, while respectable, rarely propelled anyone into stardom on their own. She had a presence, poise, elegance, and a camera-friendly charm, But in a city where hundreds of equally determined performers lined up for every casting call, presence alone was never enough. Her earliest roles were often blink-and-you-miss-it moments. Brief appearances in shows like General Hospital and CSI New York, a few lines in Century City, and a spot in 90210. She also worked as a briefcase model on Deal or No Deal, a job that provided steady pay but no meaningful career advancement. These were stepping stones, but they weren't the kind of credits that made a director or producer remember your name months later. In the unforgiving ladder of Hollywood, Meghan was still somewhere near the bottom, trying to figure out how to climb faster than the thousands of others chasing the same dream. Industry insiders who knew her at the time often remarked on her strategic nature. She was polite but purposeful, the type to remember names, follow up after meetings, and position herself at events where influential people would be. This wasn't unusual. Networking is practically a second job for aspiring actors, but Meghan had an instinct for it that some described as sharper than most. She understood that while talent mattered, access mattered more, and she worked at cultivating both. She maintained a polished image at industry mixers, red carpet charity events, and even casual after-parties, always appearing prepared for an introduction that could lead somewhere. Her break into more recognizable territory came with her role as Rachel Zane on Suits in 2011. The legal drama was filmed in Toronto, away from the Los Angeles spotlight, but it gave her a stable platform. Playing a smart, ambitious paralegal allowed her to showcase a combination of charm and intelligence that resonated with viewers. Suits wasn't an immediate cultural juggernaut, but it had a devoted audience and was a reliable performer for USA Network. For Meghan, it was steady work and a chance to build a fan base. Still, Suits was cable television, not a blockbuster movie, and in Hollywood terms, it didn't automatically translate to bigger opportunities on the big screen. That's where the allure of feature films came in. For television actors, landing a role in a high-profile movie, especially one backed by a respected director, was a way to prove range and versatility. It could open doors to more significant projects, endorsement deals, and a higher profile in the industry. For Meghan, who was approaching her mid-30s during her time on Suits, the urgency was real. Hollywood is notoriously unkind to actresses as they age out of their 20s, and she was aware that the window for certain kinds of roles was narrowing. It's in this context that the alleged meeting with Judd Apatow, as described on The Tonight Show, becomes more significant. Judd represented the kind of opportunity that could catapult her from cable TV respectability to mainstream cinematic recognition. His projects had a track record of turning supporting actors into leads and leads into box office draws. For someone with Meghan's ambitions, getting into one of his films would not just be another credit. It could be a pivot point. But those pre-Suits years had already instilled in Meghan a clear understanding of how competitive the field was. She had been in audition rooms with hundreds of women who looked like her, sounded like her, and were just as prepared. Casting decisions could hinge on the smallest details. How you carried yourself in the waiting room, whether you already had a relationship with the casting director, even whether you shared a personal rapport with someone influential on the project. In an environment that often blurs the lines between personal and professional, knowing how to navigate those waters was as much a survival skill as knowing your lines. Her time in Los Angeles also exposed her to the layered hierarchy of Hollywood's social circles. It wasn't enough to attend industry events. You had to be in the right pockets of those events, where meaningful conversations happened away from cameras. Meghan made inroads in these spaces, connecting with stylists, agents, and mid-level producers who could get her into rooms she might not otherwise have entered. She wasn't a tabloid fixture then, but she was known in certain circles as someone on the rise, someone who paid attention to her personal brand before the term became ubiquitous. This ambition was not without its challenges. The competition was relentless, and rejection was a constant. For every callback she got, there were dozens of roles that went to someone else. Friends from that period have said she was resilient, not the type to let a missed opportunity linger for long, but also that she was always thinking about the next move. It was a mindset that kept her hustling, seeking out projects that might put her in front of the right people at the right time. Her small film appearances, such as roles in Remember Me and Horrible Bosses, showed she was already edging toward bigger opportunities. While these parts were minor, they demonstrated a willingness to be versatile and to take on projects with high-profile casts. Each one was a brick in the path she was building, even if the results weren't immediate. It was a long game, but in Hollywood, momentum can shift in an instant if the right opportunity presents itself. By the time Suits had established her as a television regular, Meghan's career was stable but not explosive. The leap to film was still the elusive next step, and that's why the alleged moment with Judd Apatow, if it happened as he implied, would have been pivotal. It wasn't just about landing a part. It was about changing the trajectory of her career entirely. For an actress in her position, opportunities like that didn't come often, and the pressure to seize them by any means possible was immense. These pre-Suits and early Suits years are the backdrop for understanding Meghan's mindset during the period Judd referenced. She was ambitious, calculated, and deeply aware of the stakes. Whether one sees that as resourcefulness or opportunism depends on the lens through which her actions are viewed. But in the brutal calculus of Hollywood career building, it's clear that she understood the value of aligning herself with powerful figures. And Judd, in that moment on The Tonight Show, was reminding the world of just how powerful he was in that equation. If the alleged meeting between Meghan Markle and Judd Apatow happened the way his statement implied, it likely unfolded in one of those settings where Hollywood business and personal interaction blend seamlessly, a place where the line between a casual conversation and a professional pitch is so thin that crossing it can happen without either party realizing it until later. In Los Angeles, that setting could have been anywhere from a private industry mixer at a Beverly Hills hotel to an after-party following a film premiere. It's in these moments, away from casting offices and formal auditions, that the most important introductions are often made. Imagine a private rooftop bar with a panoramic view of the city, the kind of place where the music is low enough for conversation but exclusive enough that every face in the room is either famous or trying to be. In that kind of environment, directors like Judd are accustomed to being approached, sometimes by actors, sometimes by agents, and sometimes by people who simply want to make a connection for the future. Meghan, with her polished presence and ability to command attention in a crowd, would have known how to make the approach seem natural. Perhaps she had been introduced through a mutual acquaintance, or perhaps she simply spotted an opening in the conversation and took it. The way Judd described it on The Tonight Show suggested a directness, an unambiguous tone, as if the conversation shifted quickly from polite pleasantries to the heart of the matter. That kind of pivot is risky. It requires confidence and a certain read on the other person's receptiveness. In a city where everyone is pitching something, scripts, ideas, themselves, directness can be either refreshing or jarring. Judd's recollection implied that it caught his attention not because it was the first time someone had made such a suggestion, but because of who was making it and how clearly it was framed as a trade. These kinds of propositions rarely come in the form of blunt, transactional language. More often, they are couched in flattery, hints, or a shared sense of mutual benefit. The words might have been framed in a way that left room for plausible deniability, something like, "I'd love to work with you, and I'm sure we could get to know each other better over dinner." On the surface, that's innocuous, but in certain contexts, it carries an understood subtext. It's the kind of offer that depends entirely on the atmosphere, the relationship between the people involved, and what has been said in the moments before. Judd's position in the industry at that time meant he could greenlight or block opportunities with a single decision. For Meghan, then still building her film credentials, the stakes in that conversation would have been high. If she truly did make such a proposal, it might have been motivated by the urgency she felt about breaking into feature films before time and industry bias began to narrow her options. In her world, this could have been seen as taking control of her career. In his, it may have been perceived as crossing a line. The setting matters here, too, because industry networking events can create a false sense of intimacy. Alcohol is often flowing, the lighting is low, and the social rules are looser than in an office or on a set. People are more inclined to speak freely, to take chances in conversation they wouldn't take elsewhere. A moment like this could have been sparked by a few minutes of banter, perhaps some shared jokes about the chaos of production, and then a carefully placed comment that shifted the tone. Judd's recollection didn't focus on the lead-up. It centered on the pivot, the moment when he realized the conversation had turned into an offer he wasn't expecting. What's also worth considering is how quickly such an exchange can turn into a permanent memory for one person and a fleeting moment for another. For Judd, especially if it stood out as unusually bold, it could have become one of those anecdotes he carried for years before deciding to share. For Meghan, it might have been one of many conversations she had while working to get in front of the right people, perhaps one she didn't expect to be remembered in detail. The logistics of such a meeting, how it was arranged, whether it was chance or deliberate, remain unknown. But Judd's telling implied that there was no ambiguity in what he believed was being proposed. That's the detail that makes his statement so potent. The certainty in his tone suggested that, for him, there was no mistaking her meaning. In the entertainment world, where misunderstandings can be common and reputations fragile, that kind of certainty is rare and dangerous. It's also possible that there was a follow-up to that encounter, perhaps a call, an email, or another meeting that reinforced his interpretation of her intent. While he didn't elaborate on The Tonight Show, the absence of denial or clarification afterward suggests that he's standing by his account. For Meghan, the alleged meeting, if it happened, would be just one more intersection in her career where ambition and controversy collided. The reconstruction of that night, while speculative, is anchored in the dynamics of Hollywood networking culture. Opportunistic conversations, high-stakes subtext, and the constant awareness of who holds the keys to the next big opportunity. Whether it was a calculated move or a misunderstood overture, Judd's decision to make it public years later added a fresh layer of intrigue to a relationship that might have otherwise been forgotten. And in doing so, he ensured that the alleged meeting would be dissected in exactly this way, piece by piece, moment by moment, until every possible interpretation had been wrung from it. When the clip of Judd Apatow's statement began circulating online, the industry's reaction was swift but layered. In Hollywood, where public image and professional alliances are as valuable as box office numbers, a claim like this doesn't just fade into the background. It creates ripples that move through agencies, production offices, casting networks, and PR firms almost instantly. By the next morning, entertainment trade publications had already picked up the story, not as a tabloid scoop, but as a legitimate industry talking point. People weren't just gossiping. They were calculating the potential impact. Among Judd's peers, directors, producers, and writers, the response was a mix of quiet acknowledgement and guarded conversation. In private settings, some admitted they weren't entirely surprised. The idea of actors making personal overtures to secure roles was not foreign to them, even if they wouldn't say so publicly. Others were more cautious, pointing out that Judd's reputation meant he didn't need to fabricate such a story for attention, but also that without specifics, it was impossible to confirm. In an industry where careers are built on relationships, few were willing to go on record with strong opinions either way. Agents and managers reacted differently. For them, this wasn't just a matter of curiosity, it was a professional hazard. They deal with the delicate dance between access and propriety on a daily basis, and a high-profile claim like this risked casting a shadow over the entire process. Some feared it would make industry networking even more fraught, with every social interaction potentially open to misinterpretation. Others speculated privately about whether Meghan's team would respond, knowing that silence could be read as avoidance, but a public rebuttal could keep the story alive longer. Actors, particularly women, had a more nuanced reaction. Some saw it as yet another example of the double standard in Hollywood. Men in power often recount these stories without considering the impact on the woman's reputation, while women who speak up about similar experiences are questioned or dismissed. Others, however, admitted, again, off the record, that calculated propositions were not unheard of in their circles, especially for those trying to break out of smaller television roles into feature films. This created an uncomfortable space in the conversation, one where people acknowledged the gray areas without wanting to define them. Entertainment journalists treated the story cautiously at first. The lack of concrete detail made it difficult to frame as hard news, but the names involved made it impossible to ignore. Publications like Variety and The Hollywood Reporter referenced the exchange in broader pieces about Hollywood power dynamics, avoiding sensational headlines but still ensuring the quote reached industry insiders. Gossip outlets, by contrast, had no such reservations. They ran with the story aggressively, pairing it with archival photos of Meghan and Judd at different events, even if those photos weren't connected to the incident. This visual association gave the impression of a deeper connection, whether or not one existed. Social media amplified the split in reactions. On platforms like Twitter and Instagram, industry professionals and fans alike weighed in, often revealing more about their own biases than about the actual event. Meghan's supporters dismissed Judd's statement as opportunistic and possibly sexist, framing it as an attempt to undermine a successful woman who had already endured intense public scrutiny. Critics of Meghan saw it as further confirmation of their belief that her career was built on manipulation rather than merit. Influencers and podcast hosts seized the moment to produce think pieces and discussion segments, knowing that any content tied to Meghan's name drew clicks and engagement. Inside production offices, there were quieter discussions about what this meant for both Judd and Meghan moving forward. For Judd, the risk was minimal in terms of job opportunities. His track record and network meant he wasn't likely to face career repercussions for sharing a personal account, even if it was controversial. For Meghan, the calculus was different. Even unproven allegations can affect casting decisions, brand partnerships, and public perception, especially when they feed into existing narratives about a person. Public relations professionals saw the situation as a case study in modern crisis management. They debated whether Meghan's best move was to ignore it entirely, issue a strong denial, or shift the conversation toward a broader topic like the challenges women face in entertainment. Some speculated that if she responded at all, it would be through an interview with a sympathetic journalist rather than a direct social media statement. Judd, on the other hand, didn't appear to be managing the story actively, which suggested he either didn't view it as a threat or was content to let the media cycle run its course. Industry veterans recognized that the real significance of the story wasn't just in the claim itself, but in what it revealed about how quickly reputations can be affected by a few sentences on a late-night talk show. They also noted that Judd's willingness to name Meghan directly, rather than keeping the anecdote anonymous, broke an unspoken rule. In Hollywood, it's common to share blind items where identities are thinly veiled, but rare to make them explicit unless there's a calculated reason. The fact that he did so meant this wasn't just casual storytelling. It was intentional, and that intention became a subject of speculation in its own right. The industry's reaction, then, was not a single unified response, but a complex web of interpretations, each shaped by the observer's relationship to the people involved, their personal experiences, and their understanding of Hollywood's unspoken codes. Some saw it as a brave act of candor, others as a reckless airing of private matters, and many as a moment that, regardless of its truth, would now live in the shared memory of the business. In an environment where perception often becomes reality, that might be the most lasting consequence of all. The ethics debate surrounding intimacy in exchange for career advancement in Hollywood is as old as the industry itself, yet it remains one of its most controversial and polarizing topics. Judd Apatow's statement didn't just bring Meghan Markle's name into this ongoing conversation. It reignited a larger moral question about the fine line between consensual arrangements and exploitative power dynamics. In the days following the Tonight Show revelation, the conversation shifted from the personal details of Judd's account to the broader, thornier issue. When someone offers or accepts intimacy for a professional gain, is it always wrong? Or are there circumstances where it becomes a calculated choice in a brutal system? Hollywood, like many industries that thrive on gatekeepers, operates within an unbalanced structure where opportunity is controlled by a small number of influential people. Producers, directors, casting agents, and financiers can decide who gets a role, who gets a meeting, and ultimately, who gets the career-changing break. This imbalance has created an environment where those seeking success may feel the unspoken expectation to offer more than just talent. While overt coercion is condemned, the more subtle forms, where offers are implied rather than demanded, exist in a murky ethical space that's harder to define. Defenders of those who make such propositions often frame it as agency. In this view, an actor offering something personal in exchange for a career opportunity is exercising control over their own path. They argue that in a cutthroat industry, leveraging whatever advantages you have, whether it's networking skills, personal relationships, or physical attraction, is simply part of the game. To them, it's no different from a business deal. Both parties know what they want, both stand to benefit, and both are consenting adults. Critics, however, counter that this framing ignores the systemic power imbalance. Consent in such scenarios can be compromised by the disparity in power. When one party has the authority to alter the other's career trajectory, the freedom to say no without consequence becomes questionable. In their view, even if the offer appears voluntary, the underlying pressure is inherently coercive. They argue that this perpetuates a culture where talent and hard work are secondary to personal arrangements, further marginalizing those who refuse to engage in such exchanges. In Meghan Markle's case, the debate became particularly intense because her public image has been built on themes of empowerment, breaking barriers, and defying institutional pressures. For those who believe Judd's account, the idea that she might have engaged in such an exchange is seen as hypocritical, undermining her carefully crafted narrative. For others, even if the allegation were true, it would be framed as a pragmatic move in an industry stacked against women of color trying to break into leading roles in major films. The #MeToo movement brought this conversation into the mainstream, exposing the more predatory side of these arrangements. It also forced the industry to grapple with the distinction between criminal abuse and consensual but morally questionable deals. In the years since, there has been a heightened awareness of how these dynamics play out, but that awareness has not eradicated the practice. If anything, it has pushed it further underground, with propositions framed more subtly, through intermediaries, or behind closed doors at private events. There's also the question of personal accountability. Some argue that while the industry structure may create these conditions, individuals still have the power to reject offers and choose the harder path. Others counter that the so-called harder path is often inaccessible, particularly for those without existing industry connections or independent wealth to sustain them through years of unpaid auditions and rejections. In that light, taking the deal can seem less like a choice and more like the only viable option for survival in the business. The cultural perception of these exchanges also varies depending on gender. When men are rumored to have offered intimacy for roles, the story is often treated with humor or framed as a quirky anecdote. When women are involved, it tends to be framed as a moral failing, a stain on their credibility, and an indication that they didn't earn their success legitimately. This double standard shapes not only how these stories are told, but also how they are remembered. In Meghan's case, this bias means the allegation could have a far more damaging impact on her reputation than it might on a man in a similar situation. For Hollywood insiders, the ethical debate also touches on the unspoken rules of discretion. Many believe that while such arrangements are not uncommon, they are rarely discussed openly. Naming names breaks a kind of professional code, one that protects both the gatekeepers and the aspirants. Judd's decision to go public with his account disrupted that code, and it's part of why his statement caused such a stir. It forced an industry that prefers to keep these transactions in the shadows to confront them in the glare of public attention. Ultimately, the ethics of intimacy for opportunity deals boiled down to competing values, the ideal of a merit-based industry versus the reality of a competitive, unequal system. Those who believe in preserving the integrity of the craft see such arrangements as corrosive, undermining the value of skill and effort. Those who view Hollywood as a survival game see them as strategic moves within an unfair structure. Neither side is likely to convince the other, but the conversation reveals just how deeply entrenched these dynamics are, and how easily a single allegation can drag them back into the spotlight. Judd's story didn't just implicate Meghan. It reminded the industry and the public that these debates are far from over. As long as there is imbalance in who controls opportunity, and as long as careers can be made or broken on the whim of a few, the moral gray zone will remain. And every time a figure as influential as Judd brings it up, the discussion gets sharper, louder, and harder to ignore. The public reaction to Judd Apatow's revelation was immediate, intense, and deeply polarized. Within hours of the Tonight Show episode airing, the moment had been clipped, shared, and replayed millions of times across multiple platforms. What began as a short exchange in a late-night studio quickly transformed into a cultural talking point, dominating entertainment headlines and trending across social media. The speed of the spread was no surprise. Meghan Markle's name alone guarantees attention. But the nature of the allegation ensured that the reactions were emotionally charged and sharply divided. On one side were those who believed Judd without hesitation. For this camp, the logic was straightforward. Judd Apatow, a respected figure with decades in the business, had no obvious reason to fabricate such a story. These supporters framed his statement as an act of honesty, perhaps even courage, in an industry where such stories are often buried. They pointed to his tone on the show, serious, deliberate, without the usual comedic inflection, as evidence that he intended to be taken at face value. To them, Meghan's past was fair game for examination, and this was simply another piece of a larger puzzle about her rise to prominence. On the other side were Meghan's defenders, who saw the moment as yet another in a long line of public attacks designed to chip away at her credibility. This group argued that Judd's choice to share the story without context or corroboration was irresponsible, especially given the misogynistic undertones that often color conversations about women in entertainment. They accused him of feeding into a media narrative that has, in their view, unfairly targeted Meghan for years. For these supporters, the allegation was not a revelation but an extension of the smear campaigns they believe have followed her since her marriage to Prince Harry. In between these two camps were the undecided observers, people intrigued by the drama but skeptical of both sides. This group questioned why Judd would bring up the story at this particular moment. Was it a calculated move to generate publicity for an upcoming project? A spontaneous slip that he instantly regretted? Or something said with the knowledge that it would ignite conversation but without a full understanding of the consequences? Their skepticism extended to Meghan as well. While they weren't ready to condemn her, they weren't convinced the allegation was entirely baseless either. Social media became the primary battleground for these debates. On Twitter, hashtags supporting Judd and hashtags defending Meghan trended simultaneously, each side using the same clip to make opposite arguments. Instagram accounts with large followings dissected the moment in stories and reels, pausing the video to analyze body language and microexpressions. TikTok creators produced reaction videos, some delivering earnest breakdowns of Hollywood's power dynamics, others using the clip as a jumping-off point for satire or parody. The discourse wasn't limited to fans. Celebrities and industry figures began subtly weighing in, often without naming names, dropping vague posts about integrity, respect, and truth. Mainstream media coverage reflected the same divide. Tabloid outlets amplified the story with sensational headlines, framing it as a scandal and pulling archival photos to suggest past encounters between Meghan and Judd. More traditional entertainment journalism outlets treaded carefully, acknowledging the claim but focusing on the broader industry implications rather than the specific allegation. Opinion pieces appeared in online magazines and newspapers, with writers either defending Meghan's character or commending Judd for addressing a taboo subject. Public opinion was further shaped by Meghan's own silence in the immediate aftermath. Her decision not to issue a statement fueled speculation. Supporters saw her silence as dignified restraint, a refusal to dignify what they considered a baseless attack. Critics interpreted it as strategic avoidance, a way to let the story fade without risking a direct denial that could be challenged later. Every hour without a response became part of the narrative, especially as the clip continued to circulate. For Judd, the reaction was mixed, but notably less damaging than it might have been for someone with less industry standing. While some accused him of being opportunistic or insensitive, others admired his willingness to speak plainly. His own silence after the interview, no clarifying statements, no backtracking, seemed to signal that he was content to let the moment stand as it was. Whether that silence was strategic or simply his way of avoiding further media frenzy, it added to the intrigue. Outside the United States, reactions varied depending on local media framing. In the UK, where Meghan's relationship with the press has been especially fraught, the story was picked up with particular zeal by certain outlets, often positioned as yet another truth emerging about her Hollywood years. In other parts of the world, coverage was less about Meghan specifically and more about the broader issue of intimate propositions in the film industry. What united all these responses, whether supportive, critical, or undecided, was the recognition that this was not just another piece of celebrity gossip. It was a collision of two powerful public personas, both with their own reputations, fan bases, and narratives. For Meghan, the stakes were tied to her personal brand as an advocate for empowerment and integrity. For Judd, they were tied to his image as a respected figure who operates with authenticity. The public reaction didn't just split into camps. It also underscored how deeply invested people are in the stories of public figures they've never met, and how a single statement on a talk show can ignite a cultural moment that feels far larger.